My name is Jennifer Stewart. I was 24 years old when my father threw my passport in the trash on Father's Day. He did it right there at the dinner table in front of my grandmother, my uncle, and my 19-year-old brother. That passport was everything. London, a promotion I'd earned after 6 years of working nights, weekends, and holidays, while everyone else in my family took credit for things they never built. 6 years of running his business for free, cooking his meals, and pretending I didn't have dreams of my own, and he threw it in the garbage like it was junk meal. I thought that was the worst moment of my life. I was wrong. Within 2 minutes, my grandmother did something that unraveled 20 years of my father's authority, and it all started with a piece of paper he didn't know existed. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with this story. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Now, let me take you back to the spring of 2018, the year everything changed. The house on Cedar Lane looked respectable from the outside. 2-story colonial, burgundy shutters, a lawn my father mowed every Saturday morning at exactly 8 a.m. Not because he enjoyed it, but because he needed the neighbors to see him doing it. Image mattered to Stephen Stewart. Control mattered more. Inside, every square inch operated on his terms. The thermostat stayed at 62 degrees in winter because he said anything higher was wasteful. The television remote lived on the armrest of his recliner, his channel, his schedule. Dinner was served at 6 sharp, and God help you if the butter wasn't soft when he wanted to spread it on his bread. And that house, a 3-bedroom colonial with hardwood floors and a crack in the basement wall that had been there since I was 9, had been in our family since before I could remember. My grandmother helped my parents buy it when they first got married in 1994. But my father called it my house, the way he called everything. My house, my rules. I heard that sentence every week, sometimes twice, sometimes before breakfast. My mother's name was Rebecca. She had auburn hair that she wore in a loose braid down her back and a way of humming while she cooked that made the whole kitchen feel warmer. I know this because I was 12 years old when she died, and those 2 details are the ones I've held on to the tightest. Ovarian cancer, stage 2 by the time they found it, stage 4 by Thanksgiving. She was gone before the first snow melted in the yard she used to plant tulips in every spring. After the funeral, my father changed. Or maybe he didn't change. Maybe the grief just burned away whatever thin layer of patience had been keeping the rest of him hidden. He moved through the house like a man reclaiming territory. First, the photos came down. Every picture of my mother off the walls, off the fridge, off the mantle, packed into a cardboard box and shoved into the attic behind the Christmas decorations. I snuck one out, a small snapshot of her holding me at the Westerville 4th of July parade. Red, white, and blue ribbons in my hair, both of us laughing. I kept it pressed inside my journal like a secret. Then the rules tightened. No mentioning Mom at the table, no crying where he could see it, no asking when things would feel normal again. "Your mother had dreams too," he said to me once when I was 14 and made the mistake of telling him I wanted to study business someday. Look where that got her. He said it the way you'd comment on a traffic jam, just a fact, like dying was something she'd done on purpose to inconvenience him. I found out years later from my grandmother, in a sentence she started and then stopped, looking away, that my father had forbidden my mother from going back to work after I was born. Rebecca had wanted to finish her degree in interior design. He said no. She stayed. That was the first time I understood that silence in our family wasn't peace, it was obedience. But that wasn't even the worst part. My father owned a woodworking business, Stewart and Son Woodworks, a custom furniture shop on the east side of Westerville. He'd built it from nothing, or so he told everyone. Custom tables, cabinets, shelving units for wealthy clients in Columbus and the surrounding suburbs. The sign out front had his name in bold letters, and underneath, in smaller font, the word son. Singular, not sons, not and daughter, just son. That son was my brother Josh, 19 years old, a community college dropout, and the only person in our family who had never worked a single day at that shop. I started working at Stewart & Son when I was 14 years old. Not building furniture. My father made it clear that was men's work. I answered phones. I filed invoices. I chased down clients who hadn't paid. I learned QuickBooks when I was 15 because the bookkeeper quit and my father refused to hire another one. By the time I was 17, I was doing the taxes, managing the schedule, ordering materials, and handling customer complaints. I did all of this for free. Not minimum wage, not a small allowance, free. Because according to my father, family doesn't charge family. This business puts food on your table, he'd say whenever I brought it up. The least you can do is answer the phone. Meanwhile, Josh got $200 a week in allowance for doing nothing. He didn't make his bed, he didn't take out the trash, he didn't even know how to run the dishwasher because he'd never had to learn. When I was 16, I asked my father for $50 to buy a dress for homecoming, a simple dress, navy blue, on sale at Kohl's. He told me I could earn it by working extra hours at the shop. I worked 14 hours that weekend. He gave me $30 and said the rest was docked for a phone call I'd missed on Thursday. Josh got a $400 gaming console that Christmas, unprompted, unearned, just because he wanted it. Little did they know, I was keeping track of everything. But here's the thing. I also went to college, Ohio State University, business degree, graduated in 2017 with a 3.6 GPA. I paid for it myself. Scholarships covered 60%. The rest came from a part-time job at a coffee shop near campus, 22 hours a week on top of classes, on top of the 15 to 20 hours I still put in at my father's shop every week because he said the family needed me. My father didn't come to my graduation. He had an important delivery that day, a custom dining table for a client in Upper Arlington, a $3,200 table. That was the price of his daughter's milestone. He posted a photo on Facebook that afternoon, him and Josh at a Reds game, hot dogs in hand, caption reading, "Perfect Father Sunday," 47 likes, 12 comments saying what a great dad he was. I saw it from my dorm room, still in my cap and gown, sitting alone with a diploma no one in my family had acknowledged. I texted my father that morning to remind him of the time and location. He'd replied with one word, busy. My grandmother couldn't come either. She'd had a fall the week before and her doctor wouldn't clear her to make the drive. She called me 3 times that day, once in the morning to wish me luck, once after the ceremony to tell me she was proud, and once that night when she somehow knew I'd been crying. "You did it, sweetheart," she said. "You did it despite everything. That's the part that matters." She was right, but it still hurt. That was June 2017. But let me take you back further, to the moment I first understood exactly where I stood in my father's world. I was 18 years old, a junior at Ohio State. I'd just been offered a summer internship at a marketing firm in downtown Columbus, Morrison & Blake, a boutique agency that handled campaigns for mid-sized companies across the Midwest. It was unpaid, but prestigious, the kind of thing that opens doors, the kind of thing that looks like a future. They'd picked me out of 200 applicants. The hiring manager said I had raw talent and a clear voice. She said she saw something special in me. I told my father at dinner, voice shaking, heart pounding, thinking maybe this time he'd be proud. Maybe this time he'd see me. He didn't look up from his plate. "And who's going to run the office while you're playing intern?" he said. "You think Josh is going to answer the phones? You think customers are going to wait for you to get back from your little adventure?" Josh, who was 13 at the time and spent his summers playing video games in his room, didn't even flinch. He just kept eating, like the conversation had nothing to do with him. Because in my father's world, it didn't. Josh existed in a different category, the protected category, the heir. "Dad, it's only 3 months," I said. "I can train someone before I go, or you could hire a temp. It's $10 an hour. I looked it up." My father set down his fork. He looked at me the way you'd look at a dog that had peed on the carpet, a mix of disappointment and mild disgust. "You're not going," he said. "This family needs you here. End of discussion." I tried one more time. "Dad, please, this could change my whole career. This could—" He slammed his hand on the table. The glasses rattled. Josh flinched, and that was the end of the conversation. I went to my room and cried for 2 hours. I emailed the hiring manager the next day and told her I couldn't accept the position due to family obligations. She wrote back saying she was sorry to hear it. She said she hoped I'd apply again next year. I never did. 3 weeks later, my father bought Josh a car. A used Honda Civic, sure, but still, a car. $4,800 paid in cash. He said it was because Josh needed to get to soccer practice. Josh had quit soccer 2 months earlier. Nobody mentioned that. Looking back, I should have seen the pattern. Fast forward to 2018. I was 24 years old, working as a marketing coordinator at a mid-sized firm in Columbus. It wasn't my dream job, but it was mine. I'd gotten it on my own without my father's help, without his name, without his permission. I was still doing the books for Stewart and Son, still going to the shop on Saturdays, still cooking dinner 3 nights a week because my father said Josh couldn't be expected to fend for himself and someone had to keep the house running. But something had shifted. I'd started documenting everything. Every hour I worked at the shop, logged in a spreadsheet. Every payment I should have received but didn't, calculated at Ohio minimum wage. Every promise my father made and broke, written down with dates and witnesses. By January 2018, that spreadsheet had 312 rows, $47,600. That's how much my father owed me, conservatively, for 6 years of unpaid labor. I didn't know what I was going to do with that number. I just knew I needed it to exist somewhere outside my head. I needed proof that I wasn't imagining things. That's when I reconnected with Paul Harrison. Paul had been in my study group at Ohio State. Quiet, focused, the kind of guy who highlighted his textbooks in 3 different colors and always knew the answer when the professor called on him. We'd lost touch after graduation, but he'd gone to law school, passed the bar in 2017, and was now working at a small firm in Columbus that specialized in family and property law. I ran into him at a coffee shop in February. We talked for 2 hours. I told him everything. He didn't tell me to sue my father. He didn't tell me to run. He just looked at me with this calm, steady expression and said, "You need to understand your options, and you need to start protecting yourself." Over the next 3 months, Paul helped me organize everything: the spreadsheet, the emails, the text messages where my father demanded I come to the shop or else. He helped me understand what I could prove and what I couldn't. He helped me see that I wasn't crazy and I wasn't ungrateful and I wasn't the villain my father had spent 12 years convincing me I was. But what happened next still gives me chills. In April 2018, I got a call from my company's HR department. They wanted to meet with me about an opportunity, an internal transfer. Our London office needed a marketing manager. The role paid $78,000 a year, nearly double my current salary. Full relocation package. Start date, August 1st. They'd chosen me because of my performance reviews, my client retention numbers, and a campaign I'd led that had increased engagement by 34% in 6 months. I said yes before I left the room. Then I sat in my car in the parking garage and cried. Not sad tears, relieved ones. The kind of crying you do when a door you thought was locked forever suddenly swings open. I applied for my passport the next week. It arrived in May, tucked inside a plain envelope that I hid in the bottom of my closet, underneath a box of old textbooks. I told my grandmother first. Katie Stewart was 71 years old, a retired school teacher with silver hair she wore in a short, practical cut, and a way of listening that made you feel like the most important person in the room. She'd been widowed since I was 6, and she'd spent the last 18 years watching her son become someone she didn't recognize. I drove to her apartment on a Sunday afternoon and told her everything: the job, the salary, London, August. She didn't interrupt. She didn't tell me I was making a mistake. She just reached across her kitchen table, took my hand, and said, "It's time, sweetheart, and I'm going to help you." Then she told me something I never expected. The building where Stewart and Son operates, the shop my father has run for 20 years, the business he calls his legacy, I own it. I stared at her. I didn't understand. She explained, in 2003, when my grandfather died, his life insurance paid out $180,000. Katie used that money, plus her savings, to buy the commercial property on Eastland Avenue. She'd originally planned to rent it out for income, but my father was struggling. He'd just started the business. He needed space. So she let him use it, rent-free, no contract, no paperwork, just a mother helping her son. "He's been operating out of my building for 20 years, she said, and he has no idea." My grandmother had never told him. She'd paid the property taxes herself, quietly every year. The deed was in her name, always had been. She'd kept it that way because, in her words, I knew who he was becoming, and I knew someday I might need leverage. That day had come. What I didn't know, what made my stomach drop when I found out later, was that my father had already gone behind my back. He'd told everyone, clients, suppliers, his buddies at the hardware store, that I was taking over the administrative side of Stewart & Son, full-time, starting January 2019. He'd printed business cards with my name on them. He'd renovated a small office in the back of the shop, new desk, new chair, a nameplate that read, Jennifer Stewart, Office Manager. He hadn't asked me, he hadn't mentioned it, he just decided, the way he always decided, and assumed I would fall in line. I found out from a client who congratulated me at the grocery store. "Your dad must be so proud," she said, "keeping it in the family." I smiled, I nodded, I went home and threw up. My grandmother and I made a plan. I would tell my father about London at the Father's Day dinner. She would be there. If things went wrong, she'd have everything she needed in her purse. Not as a trap, not as an ambush, just in case. She'd carried important documents in her handbag for years, a habit from her generation, from being a widow, from learning the hard way that you never know when you'll need proof of something. I hoped I wouldn't need her backup plan. I hoped my father would surprise me. I hoped that somewhere, underneath the control and the anger and the 12 years of treating me like staff instead of family, there was a man who could be proud of his daughter. I was wrong. Father's Day, June 17th, 2018. I set the table the way I always did. My father's plate at the head, his water glass on the right, his napkin folded into a rectangle because he said triangles look sloppy. Josh's place to his left, Uncle Donald's across from Josh, my grandmother's chair at the other end, nearest the kitchen, where she always sat, close to the door, like someone who always kept an exit in sight. I'd cooked the usual rotation: roast beef, mashed potatoes, green beans with almonds. My father's menu, my father's schedule, my father's rules. The smell of rosemary filled the kitchen, and I remember thinking how strange it was that something could smell like home and feel like a trap at the same time. Katie arrived at 5:45. She wore her navy cardigan, the one with the pearl buttons, the one she wore to every family dinner like it was armor. She kissed my forehead at the door, squeezed my hand once, and set her leather handbag, structured, dark brown, worn soft at the handles, on the floor beside her. I didn't notice how carefully she placed it. I didn't notice that it was heavier than usual. My father was in a good mood. That should have been my first warning. He came downstairs whistling, clapped Josh on the shoulder, even said, "Smells good, Jen," as he sat down, a compliment so rare I almost dropped the serving spoon. I knew why he was cheerful. He thought next year I'd be sitting in that little office in the back of his shop, answering his phones for the rest of my life. His plan was working. My plan was in my jacket pocket, the passport, and in my purse, the offer letter, printed on company letterhead. I waited until everyone had their plates, until my father took his first bite and nodded the way he did when the food met his standards, until the table was quiet. Then I pulled out the envelope. "Dad," I said. My voice was steady, but my hands weren't. "I got promoted at work. I've been offered a position in London, marketing manager. I start in August." I held the letter out to him, like an offering, like a child showing a drawing to a parent and praying they'll put it on the fridge. My father set down his fork. He looked at the letter the way you'd look at something dead on the side of the road, with a kind of distant, vaguely offended curiosity. He took it. He read it slowly, his eyes tracking left to right, his jaw tightening with each line. Then his face went red, not angry red, darker. The red of something that had been pressurized too long. He tore the letter in half. The sound, that clean, sharp rip cut through the kitchen louder than any shout. He tore it again, 4 pieces. "London," he said, not yelling, worse, level, absolute, like he was reading a verdict. "You're not going to London. You're staying right here where you belong." He looked around the table, at Josh, who was smirking, at Uncle Donald, who suddenly found his green beans fascinating, at my grandmother, who hadn't moved. "Nobody encourages this nonsense," my father said. "She's got a job at the shop starting January. That's the end of it." I sat there staring at the pieces of my letter. 6 years of work, the late nights, the weekends I'd given up, the internship I'd sacrificed, the graduation no one attended, all of it, sitting on a dinner table, torn into confetti. Then my father leaned back in his chair and said the thing I will never forget. "Your mother had the same stupid ideas, always talking about going back to school, starting her own business." He picked up his fork again. "And where is she now?" The table went silent. Even the clock on the wall seemed to hold its breath. He'd turned my mother's death into a weapon, again, the same way he'd done when I was 14 and wanted to join the debate team, the same way he'd done when I was 16 and asked about driver's ed, the same way he'd done 100 times before, pulling out her memory like a trump card to end any conversation he didn't want to have. Uncle Donald cleared his throat, but said nothing. Josh smirked into his potatoes. My grandmother's hands, I noticed, had gone very still on either side of her plate. I wanted to cry, but I knew, the way you know fire is hot, the way you know ice is cold, that crying in front of Stephen meant losing. So I reached into my jacket pocket, my fingers closed around the passport. I pulled it out and set it on the table. "I already have my passport," I said. My voice was shaking, but I didn't stop. "I've already accepted the position. I already signed the paperwork. I'm going, Dad, whether you support me or not." My father stared at the passport like it was a live grenade. His face went through several colors: red, then white, then a mottled purple I'd never seen before. "You went behind my back," he said. His voice was low, dangerous. "I went forward with my life," I said. "That's not the same thing." "The hell it isn't." He stood up so fast his chair tipped backward and hit the floor with a crash. Josh jumped. Uncle Donald half rose from his seat, but my father wasn't looking at any of them. He grabbed the passport off the table. He walked to the kitchen, his footsteps heavy on the hardwood. He stopped at the trash can, the one with the stainless steel lid and the foot pedal, the one I'd emptied 1,000 times after 1,000 dinners. And he threw my passport in the garbage. The lid clanged shut. The sound echoed through the kitchen like a gunshot. "You're not going anywhere," he said. He walked back to the table. He picked up his chair and sat down like nothing had happened. "Now clear the dishes. This conversation is over." Josh laughed. Uncle Donald stared at his plate, and I sat there, frozen, watching my father go back to eating his roast beef like nothing had happened. That's when I broke. "Excuse me," I whispered. I pushed back my chair and walked to the bathroom. I closed the door. I pulled out my phone and called Paul. He answered on the second ring. "He did it," I said. My voice cracked. "He threw my passport in the trash. He tore up the letter. He's not going to let me go." Paul was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'll call your grandmother's phone in 10 minutes. Be ready." I washed my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. I thought about my mother, who had wanted things and been told no, who had stayed, who had died in this house, in a bedroom down a hall, while her dreams collected dust in a drawer somewhere. I wasn't going to be her. I walked back to the dining room. My father didn't look up, but my grandmother did. She was sitting perfectly still at the end of the table, her hands resting on either side of her plate, her face unreadable. "Stephen," she said. Her voice was quiet, but something in it made my father's fork stop halfway to his mouth. "We need to talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about, Ma." He didn't look at her. "She's not going to London. She's staying here. End of story." "And if she doesn't?" Katie asked. My father laughed, a short, dismissive bark. "Then she can find somewhere else to live. This is my house, my business, my family." Katie nodded slowly. She set her napkin down. She folded it neat, precise, placed it to the right of her plate the way she always did, like even this small act deserved dignity. Then she stood up. She walked to the corner of the dining room where she'd set her handbag. She picked it up. She brought it back to the table and set it in front of her. My father watched her with irritation. "What are you doing? Dinner's not over." Katie opened the handbag. She reached inside and pulled out a manila envelope, thick, slightly worn at the edges. She removed a document. She unfolded it. She laid it flat on the table. "Do you know what this is?" she asked. My father glanced at it. "Some kind of deed," he said dismissively. "What does that have to do with anything?" Katie's voice didn't waver. "This is the property deed for 4417 Eastland Avenue, the building where Stewart & Son Woodworks has operated for the past 20 years. My father shrugged. "Yeah, my shop, so what?" "Your shop," Katie repeated. She tapped the document with one finger. "Look at the owner's name, Stephen." My father leaned forward. He squinted at the paper. His face went through something I'd never seen before, confusion, then disbelief, then something close to fear. The name on the deed was Katie Marie Stewart, sole owner. "What the hell is this?" My father's voice rose. "This is some kind of mistake." There's no mistake, Katie said. I bought that building in 2003 with your father's life insurance money. I let you use it rent-free because you were my son and you were struggling. But I never transferred the deed. The property is mine. It has always been mine. My father stood up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. This is insane. I've been paying utilities on that building for 20 years. I've maintained it. I've built my business there. You've been operating on my property with my permission, Katie said, and I can revoke that permission anytime I choose. The color drained from my father's face. Josh had stopped smirking. Uncle Donald looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. You're bluffing, my father said, but his voice cracked on the second word. You wouldn't do this to your own son. Katie looked at him, and for the first time I heard something almost like sadness in her tone. Not for herself, but for him, for the version of her son she'd spent 20 years hoping would show up. I'm giving you a choice, Stephen, she said. Jennifer goes to London with your blessing. You support her, you let her live her life, and you keep operating your business on my property. She paused. Or you keep fighting this, and I call my attorney tonight. My father's phone was on the table. At that exact moment, it buzzed. He grabbed it, looked at the screen, and his face went pale. The caller ID read Paul Harrison, attorney at law. It was Paul, calling to confirm that the eviction paperwork was ready if Katie needed it. She'd consulted him 2 weeks earlier, just in case. She'd hoped she wouldn't need him. She needed him. My father stared at the phone. He looked at the deed. He looked at his mother. You wouldn't, he whispered. Try me, Katie said. The silence that followed said everything. For 30 seconds, nobody moved. The only sound was the ticking of the clock and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then my father did something I'd never seen him do. He sat down. He put his hands flat on the table, and he didn't say a word. Katie picked up her handbag. She walked to the kitchen trash can, opened the lid, and retrieved my passport. She wiped it off with a napkin and handed it to me. Pack a bag, sweetheart, she said. You're coming to my apartment tonight. We'll sort out the rest tomorrow. I stood up. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else, but they carried me toward the stairs. If she leaves, my father said, his voice hollow, don't expect her to come back. Katie turned and looked at him one last time. She's not the one who needs to worry about that, Stephen. I went upstairs. I packed a bag. The same bag I'd packed 100 times in my imagination. Clothes, passport, the photo of my mother at the 4th of July parade, the journal I'd kept since I was 15. When I came downstairs, Josh was still sitting at the table, looking confused. Uncle Donald had his hand on my father's shoulder, but my father wasn't moving. He was just staring at the deed like it was a hole in the ground that had opened up beneath him. I walked past them. I didn't say goodbye. My grandmother had the car running in the driveway, the engine humming, the passenger door already open. I got in. I put my bag on my lap. I looked at the house one more time. Then Katie pulled out of the driveway, and for the first time in 24 years, Cedar Lane got smaller behind me. If you've ever had to leave a place you thought was home, whether it was a house, a relationship, or just a version of yourself you'd outgrown, you know what that drive felt like. If this story is hitting close, tap that like button so I know you're here. And if you want to know what happened when I landed in London, stay with me. This story isn't over yet. Katie's apartment was small. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with a window that overlooked a courtyard with a fountain that didn't work. It smelled like lavender and Earl Grey tea, and something warm I couldn't name but recognized. Safety, maybe. The absence of eggshells. She gave me the bed. I told her I'd take the couch. She told me she wasn't asking. I've slept on worse, she said, pulling an extra blanket from the hall closet. Your grandfather snored like a freight train for 38 years. A sofa is an upgrade. I lay in her bed in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and the voice in my head was not my own. It was Stephen's. You just destroyed your family. You're selfish. Who do you think you are? 12 years of his voice embedded in me like splinters. I could leave the house, but I couldn't leave that. Not yet. A knock on the door. Katie came in with a mug of warm chamomile and sat on the edge of the bed. She didn't say anything for a while. Then, your mother would be so proud of you tonight. That broke me. Not my father's cruelty, not the torn letter, not the passport in the trash, but those 8 words, spoken quietly in a small bedroom that smelled like lavender. I cried. Not the silent, controlled tears I trained myself to produce. Real crying, the ugly kind, the kind I hadn't allowed myself since I was 12 years old. Katie held my hand and let me finish. Then she told me something I wasn't expecting. She'd been setting money aside for me since I was 14. A savings account in her name, separate from anything my father could access. $150 a month for 10 years. It's at $18,000, she said, matter-of-factly, as if she were reading a grocery receipt. Between that and your salary in London, you'll be more than fine. You'll be free. I wiped my face. Grandma, why didn't you do this sooner? She was quiet for a long time, long enough that I thought she hadn't heard me. Because I kept hoping he'd change, she said. That was my mistake. My father didn't go quietly. The calls started the next morning. Katie's phone rang at 7:15. She looked at the screen, silenced it, and went back to making toast. It rang again at 7:20, 7:31, 7:45. She let everyone go to voicemail. Then he called me. The first time, his voice was soft, almost unrecognizable. Come home, sweetheart. We can talk about this. I was upset. I said things I didn't mean. Let's sit down like a family. I didn't answer. I just listened. 2 hours later, the second call. The sweetness was gone. You're embarrassing yourself, Jennifer. The whole town is going to hear about this. You want people thinking you abandoned your father on Father's Day? The third call came at 9:40 that night. His voice was cold and flat, the Stephen I knew best. If you get on that plane, don't come back. You're dead to this family. I mean it. I didn't respond. I hung up and turned off my phone. The next week, I went to the British consulate and got an emergency replacement for my passport just in case. I signed the paperwork for London. I gave notice at my old apartment. I packed boxes. And 3 days before I left, my grandmother gave me something I wasn't expecting. A letter. Cream-colored envelope. Soft at the edges. My mother's handwriting on the front. Round letters. Careful. The kind of penmanship that belongs to someone who was taught by nuns. For Jennifer, when she's ready to fly. She wrote it during treatment, Caddy said. She gave it to me and said, give it to her when she needs it most. I've been holding it for 12 years. I opened it with shaking hands. The letter was 2 pages, written on lined paper, the ink smudged in places. Tear stains, I realized later. Some hers, now some mine. She wrote about the day I was born. She wrote about teaching me to ride a bike in the driveway. She wrote about the time I made her breakfast in bed when I was 7, burnt toast and orange juice that I'd tried to strain through a coffee filter. And near the end, in handwriting that had grown unsteady, she wrote the line I carry with me everywhere. Don't let anyone tell you what you're worth, sweetheart. Especially not the people who are supposed to love you. You were born to fly, so fly. I read it 3 times. The first time through tears, the second time through something deeper, the third time because I wanted to hear her voice, and this was the closest I would ever get. I landed at Heathrow on August 3rd, 2018, with 2 suitcases and my mother's letter tucked into my carry-on. London was gray and rainy and absolutely perfect. I found an apartment in Islington, a 1-bedroom with a bay window and a view of a small park where people walk their dogs in the mornings. I learned the tube. I learned which pubs had the best fish and chips. I learned how to live in a city where no one knew my father's name and no one expected me to answer his phones. The job was everything they'd promised. Hard, yes. Long hours, yes. But for the first time in my life, the work I did was mine. The credit I received was mine. The future I was building was mine. 6 months in, I got my first raise. A year in, I led a campaign that won an industry award. 2 years in, I was promoted again. I called my grandmother every Sunday. We talked about her week, my work, the weather in London, the weather in Ohio. She never brought up my father unless I did. I didn't. But I did keep track. Through Uncle Donald, who finally started talking to me again after a few months, I learned what happened after I left. My father went to a lawyer the week after Father's Day. He wanted to fight for the building, claim some kind of squatter's rights or implied ownership. He went to 3 different attorneys. The first one, a woman named Sandra Chin, took one look at the deed and the 20 years of property tax receipts and told him there was no case. He argued with her for 45 minutes. She asked him to leave and charged him $350 for the consultation anyway. The second lawyer, a guy 2 towns over who advertised on billboards, agreed to review the case for a $2,000 retainer. After a week, he returned the money minus a small fee and told my father the truth. She owns the building. You operate at her discretion. There's no implied transfer, no adverse possession, nothing. You've been a tenant at will for 20 years, and she can terminate that arrangement whenever she wants. My father didn't take it well. He apparently threw a stapler at the wall. The lawyer asked him to leave. The third lawyer was Craig Morrison, a semi-retired guy who operated out of a strip mall in Reynoldsburg. He told my father what he wanted to hear, that there might be a case, that they could fight it. He took a $5,000 retainer. 6 months later, after 2 failed motions and a strongly worded letter from Paul Harrison that cited 14 different precedents, Craig Morrison refunded $1,200 and told my father to accept reality. Total cost of my father's attempt to fight his own mother? $6,150 in legal fees, plus the damage to his stapler. He kept running the shop, but now he paid rent, $2,200 a month, market rate, deposited directly into an account Katie controlled. She donated half of it to a women's shelter in Columbus, the same shelter my mother had volunteered at when I was little. The other half went into a fund for Josh, in case he ever decided to grow up. Josh, by the way, had to get a job, a real one. Without me running the office, my father had to hire someone at $16 an hour. He couldn't afford to keep paying Josh an allowance on top of that. So Josh got a job at a hardware store for 8 months before quitting. Then he did deliveries for a pizza place. Then he worked at a warehouse. Last I heard, he was doing deliveries for a furniture company, not my father's company, a different one. The irony wasn't lost on me. Uncle Donald apologized to me over the phone about a year after I left. He said he was ashamed of how he'd sat there and said nothing. He said he wished he'd been braver. I told him I understood. And I did. Fear makes cowards of people who might otherwise be decent. My father never called again. Not on my birthday, not on Christmas, not when I got engaged to a kind British man named Oliver, who I met at a pub trivia night. Not when he sent me an invitation to the wedding, which he never acknowledged. He made his choice, and I made mine. I went back to Ohio once, 2 years after I left. Katie was having surgery, a minor procedure, but she was 73, and I wanted to be there. I stayed at her apartment. I drove her to the hospital. I sat in the waiting room and filled out forms and brought her home afterward with a bag of prescriptions and a stack of magazines. I didn't see my father. I didn't go to Cedar Lane. I didn't visit Stewart and Son, but I drove past it once on my way to the grocery store. The sign was still there. Stewart and Son Woodworks. The same faded letters, the same singular son. I kept driving. That was 4 years ago. I'm 30 now, married, living in a townhouse in North London with a garden the size of a postage stamp and a rescue dog named Biscuit, who snores almost as loud as my grandfather apparently did. I run the European marketing division for my company. I have a team of 12 people who call me boss and actually mean it as a compliment. I make more money than my father ever did, and I earned every penny of it. Katie is 77 and still sharp as a tack. She video calls me every Sunday, and she's learned how to use emoji, which is both adorable and slightly alarming. She still owns the building on Eastland Avenue. She says she'll sell it when my father retires or when she dies, whichever comes first. She says it with a small smile that tells me she knows exactly which one is more likely. Josh reached out to me last year, a Facebook message, awkward and stilted. He said he was sorry. He said he didn't understand back then. He said he hoped we could talk sometime. I didn't respond right away. I'm still not sure what to say to him. Forgiveness is complicated when the person asking for it isn't sure what they're apologizing for. My father is 62 years old, still running the shop, still living on Cedar Lane, in the house that he now, legally and officially, rents from my grandmother. $1,400 a month. She made him sign a lease. I don't know if he's happy. I don't know if he's lonely. I don't know if he ever thinks about the daughter he threw away over a promotion letter and a passport. I used to wonder. I used to lie awake at night imagining what I'd say to him if he called, if he apologized, if he showed up at my door with tears in his eyes and regret in his voice. I don't wonder anymore. I have a family now, not the one I was born into, the one I built. Oliver and Biscuit and Katie on the screen every Sunday. Paul Harrison, still my friend, still practicing law in Columbus. My colleagues who brought me flowers when I got married and threw me a party when I got promoted, and who have never once made me feel like I was less than. I didn't lose my family when I walked out of that house with a suitcase and my mother's letter. I finally found one. That's my story. Thank you for staying until the end. It means more than you know. If this reached you, hit that like button and subscribe. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. I want to hear your story. Drop it in the comments or send me a message. Every story matters, especially the ones that almost didn't get told. And if you want to hear another one, check the link in the description. There's a story there that's been waiting for you.